The next speech, I think, is a challenging one because I was involved in the research, and I've decided to leave Paige Hodsman to actually do the presentation. Paige and I have worked for about 10 years now on various subjects, but mostly in the realm of psychoacoustics. But as I say, our latest research topic about women's voice is, I think, a little bit more challenging and a bit more broader than workplace and design. So I'm just going to leave Paige, concept developer at Ecophon, to take you through this. Paige has got a wide, varied background. She's got an environmental background, obviously acoustics background. She recently, or last year, got a master's in psychology as well, so welcome to the psychologists amongst us. There's a few here. But other than that, please give Paige a big, warm welcome to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. So before I begin, I just would like to say thanks to Ian Smith of Network for Skills and Shireen Ali Khan of Active Consulting Group, because they brought the subject to the table. And we're also looking forward to working with them in the future. So after we do this initial research, this is the literature review, so the very early stages. We're looking forward to developing practical guidance and training on the subject. Okay, so I have a disclaimer before I start. So as I said, the original remit was to try to understand why or if women are not actually being heard in the workplace. So there's two questions that come to mind immediately. And by women, this is the traditional male-female differences as explored in legacy, the legacy literature. And what is meant by being heard: are we physically being heard or not acknowledged? So we're having to kind of make these distinctions early on. So to be clear, we recognize that there are many other factors and many confounding factors that have to be explored. Because when you look into a subject like this, as you can imagine, there's all different other things that need to be looked at in depth. So things, things like personality types, gender, racial, economic. So it opens the door to a lot more research. And there's considerable scope for that. But this review and what I'm sharing with you is just the very beginning. So by no means is this fait accompli. So what we'll do is I'll go through highlighting some of the literature that we've reviewed so far. And then we're going to share with you some insights in face-to-face interviews that we did. So we wanted to get a feel, because the body of literature was saying one thing, and then we thought, well, let's talk to people. Let's find out what people actually think. So we'll share some of that. And then at the end, Nigel's going to come back on stage, and then we'd really like to get some feedback from you. We'd like to, if you're willing to comment and give us insights, that would be great. Right, so historically, public speaking and debate have been really male disciplines. The workplace structures often reflect this. Not right or wrong, it's just sort of the way that it has been. Also, attitudes toward female or feminine voices are deeply rooted in language and culture. And this does or can make it difficult to be heard in meeting rooms and in the boardrooms. But from a physiological perspective, the impact of voice characteristics means that female voices may not be heard due to vocal characteristics and also challenges in male colleagues' ability to not only hear, but also to understand. And I'll explain more about that in a minute. And then also have to draw attention to this past versus present, because what we find is that things are definitely changing. So what we're saying has to be put into the context of, okay, 5 years, 10 years ago, a recollection about how things used to be versus how they are today, two different things. So we just need to keep that in our minds as we move forward, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So the literature review themes that arose there were 4. Not being physically heard, not being understood, not being listened to, and not being acknowledged. So from a cultural or behavioral perspective, there are cultural and social biases that can lead to preferences for lower-pitched male voices. Now, this is interesting because that's a bit contradictory to the research that indicates that we actually have a biological preference for female voices in things like, for example, GPS systems. Think of Alexa, think of Siri. And studies also suggest that men's voices are perceived as more authoritative, with both men and women preferring leaders with a deeper voice. Women's voices struggle to be heard in meetings also because we tend to have higher pitched voices, and higher pitched, those higher frequency sounds, they don't travel as far. So when we think about the way we're designing, when we have these great big meeting rooms and acoustically they haven't been designed very well, we could actually be mitigating or be detracting from adequate communication from a physics and a physical perspective as well. Women may try to adjust the pitch. Some women do this. They'll try to adjust the pitch, the tone, and the volume of their voice in order to adapt to the workplace culture. So as I said, women, we tend to have higher pitched voices. Men tend to have lower pitched voices. And so when we talk about pitch, we're relating to the sound frequency, so how high or low it is. When we talk about tone, we're talking about voice quality and the mood. And then when we're talking about volume, that's how loud or soft the sound is. And male and female voices actually evolved differently. So, for example, males develop lower-pitched voices to communicate at further distances because those lower frequency sounds travel much further, they're stronger, and this could have aided hunting, for example. The female higher-pitched voice is actually a result of having a shorter vocal tract, but we also have a larger gaps between the vocal cords. So what this does is it actually creates a bit of a breathy sound, which can be difficult to hear, especially if people are maybe a bit older and have hearing difficulties. Males tend to experience earlier and more significant hearing loss, and this is a whole host of reasons, and there's an awful lot of research on this as well, which can make understanding softer female voices more difficult. And we also process voices differently. So men and women use different parts of the brain in order to process language. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So we're often, women, we're often perceived as talking more, being more talkative in meetings, but actually the research is telling us we talk less. So just sheer talking time, it's indicating we talk less. We also might end up, women may self-silence in meetings for fear of appearing to be too talkative. And this can affect the visibility and career progression. Because as we know in organizations, if you're seen to be talking and contributing, that can aid your position in the organization. And it can be actually disadvantageous to those who don't speak so much. Also, studies are showing that men tend to speak more in the mixed gender groups and also will take more speaking turns. Women tend to participate less in the formal settings, but they may speak more in informal settings, social interactions, and we also tend to speak more in all-female groups. I think a lot of us we can relate to some of these things. So when it comes to interruptions now, in same-sex dyads, so when you have a group of males or a group of females, the interruptions are about the same. So as people, we interrupt each other pretty much the same. Men's interruptions are often described as a reflection of power and dominance, and women are frequently or more frequently interrupted. There's also higher interruptions found in the female-only dyads compared to mixed groups. That suggests that women are interrupting each other more than they would if it was a mixed group. Personality also plays a role. So this is another, we suspected some of this, but what we did is more dominant women with less seniority and men with more seniority but with agreeable personality traits were found to have similar levels of interruptions. So there's another piece of research to look at as well. And language and how we speak. So we use different words and syntax. So syntax is the order in the way that we order our words. Women also have a tendency to use more modal constructs. So the modal constructs have to do with statements that are built around the modal verbs, and these are words like must, should, could, might. We also tend to use hedges. So, well, sort of, maybe, and probably, and I think. Lots of qualifiers. And also women tend to reference emotions and experiences and feelings in our speech as well. So when it comes to understanding, okay, there's still a lack of clarity on whether this is physiological or learned, but I think that, and understanding women in particular, whether it's physiologically driven or learned, but what we know and from our experiences psychologically, physiologically, it's probably a mixture of both. But what the research has told us is that women have more nerve cells and they have greater brain hemisphere connectivity. And when using language, we use both sides. So we'll switch back and forth between both hemispheres. Men tend to just use the left side. And so this is giving some kind of maybe a look inside as to why when women are speaking, there's missed nuances. And also we could be viewed as being less concise. So it's just the way that the brain is actually processing the information. Now, not being listened to or acknowledged. This is a new word for some of us. Oh, God, okay. This is probably why I had to sort of present this. So bropriation, this is interesting, and I put this in the presentation because this did come up in the face-to-face interviews. So this is where a man may repeat what a woman has just said in a meeting, or had said previously, and then the group responds as if, oh gosh, that's a great idea, I just heard that, oh that's wonderful, and then he'll take credit for it. and this did come up quite a lot. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So also for those that are in valued roles or have specialisms, regardless of the gender, tend to be listened to more. Those with ambition, competitive nature, and confidence. Confidence came through as well. The more confident, then there's a higher degree of being listened to. And then there's still some legacy of undermining and microaggressions. And this happens. So this could result to hesitating to speak or this self-silencing for fear of appearing to talk too much. So in our interviews, it seems that the incidences of not being heard are less than they were, say, 5 to 10 years ago. Because when the conversations were what happened 10 years ago, oh, it was this, this, and this, and then, okay, so, but what's happening now? But we have to caveat that because we need to conduct some more interviews. We also think that there could be differences in different industries because our sampling size for this exercise was quite small, so we'd really like to expand out into some of the different industries. And also there's so many cultural aspects that have to be addressed. Group size makes a difference, so the larger the group, the less participation, and seniority. So more seniority, more talk time, also more or better listening skills coming from the people around the table. Right. So our next step, the literature definitely identifies that there are some differences here. So that's good. So at least we know we have something to work with. Hearing between men and women is definitely impacting communication in the workplace. And when we just start talking about it, let's learn as much as we can, and this way we can start to facilitate better communication for all of us. So here what we're going to do is develop some more questions, more interviews, so that we can get some additional qualitative data as well. Then take that information into a survey, because everybody loves a survey, right, Neil? And then we're going to examine how office design, organizational culture, and unconscious bias may be affecting our ability to be heard. We also want to focus on some newer studies, because we suspect that the pandemic has created a shift and a change among many other sort of social movements and things like that have occurred over the last 5 to 10 years. So the goal for the research is to provide guidance and training so that we can ultimately improve communication and just make our places to work better, and then hopefully a lot of other things as well. So that's me finished for now. And then Nigel, if you'd like to come up, then we can have some discussion if anyone would like to add some comments or insights. Thank you.
I asked Paige to keep it 15 minutes so we could have some questions, because I thought there might be a few questions around this. But I wanted to start with one of my polls. And the first one is, put your hand up if you or a female colleague, if you noticed a female colleague, has experienced this. Have they experienced not being heard, not being listened to, being ignored? Almost everyone, I think, about 90%. Okay, so let's ask the other question. Have you experienced, you or a male colleague, being talked over or not listened to or not being heard? What? Oh, a few, yeah, a few. So kind of where we'd expect this to be. I mean, for me, it's like that perfect storm. I think there's all these issues going on. There's the voice that Paige mentioned. There's the legacy kind of prejudice that's going on. There's racial issues, there's culture, there's socioeconomic class all comes into it. Yeah. Women having career breaks, coming back in maybe a bit down the ladder than when they left, and so on. And I think that it's that kind of, perfect storm is not the right phrase, but what's happening is that in the center of all those things, that Venn diagram, it's more apparent for women to be affected by all of these factors.
Yeah, and I think was there a question? Oh, okay. So I was just
you answer, then we'll ask.
Oh, yeah. I think too, we're in this transition, perhaps. I don't say. Please speak back and kind of join in on this too, because these are the things that, as we're talking about this subject, these are the things that come to mind. And when we think about it, one of the things I said historically, the world of work was very masculine. And it's only relatively recently that we're mixing now, and we're learning how to work better together. So it's an adjustment period. And I think that as the cultures change and we change as people, I think it's just natural that we've had to, because especially if you talk to, say, women my age, and we'll readily admit this, we adapted. We adapted our behaviors and our personalities because we had to. We came into a situation, we realized, well, this is how it works. Okay, this is what you have to do in order to survive in it. And it might have been contrary, but it also, too, we've noticed that it may not necessarily be just for women. And this is where we get into the personality aspects of things. This could also be a big portion of this could be personality types as well. But
just on the women adjusting their behaviours and their voice, and of course Maggie Thatcher, that was the classic. Yeah. She was trained to speak like a bloke with all the vegetables around her, if you remember.
I don't remember that.
and Google, they also created a training course to get women to speak more masculine, use masculine language, speak in certain tones. But that's not the right answer, surely. Why should women have to adjust to be more male? Yeah.
Well, and I guess it's a question too. I know in some of our interviews, some of the people we interviewed, they're naturally soft-spoken. And going back to the physical environment of things and thinking about the spaces we're creating, if the space isn't actually supporting good communication, people like this, they end up not talking because they're not being heard. And then this is, well, of course, we go down a rabbit hole with this, but there's communication that's being affected and things like that. So I really think that it's not so much about one having to change who they are, what they are, in order to accommodate another. It's two groups working together in order to understand each other better, so that we have this more empathetic environment to where hold on a minute, it's just like, have you ever done the insights? You know, when we start to look at personality types, and so insights is a great one because it's easy to remember. And all of a sudden you have an insight that, okay, this is somebody who's driven by data. Okay, well, I have a little bit of an understanding. I can accommodate that, and that's okay. It's not asking too much. And I think that's what we're talking, but if we don't talk about it, we're never going to know what's going on. We're just going to walk out of the room and be upset about it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, let's have some questions from the floor, from the females. Sorry. Jennifer.
A couple of nails for me and the cheese. I think personally, I think also some of the issues is we aren't taught how to communicate.
Perfect.
Yeah. So whether whoever it is we're communicating. Yep. They're not taught how. So you talked about the language that's female versus male mainstream. I've been big on for decades it's about definitive language. You know, we need to actually talk in definitive language because that's how people understand us. And if we go and speak to someone where English is not the first language, not using definitive language, then it's very difficult for them to know what it is we're trying to say. Yeah. And I think if we actually help each other or learned, trained how to communicate clearly and understandably, that would help some of this. Would you?
Yeah, okay, so then I have a follow-up question to that, because so whose communication? And then maybe this goes back to what you were saying, Nigel, because if you and, let's give an example, because you and I know each other. If you and I are talking, and plus we come from a certain part of the world, so we're, and we know exactly what each other's saying, and then we're on to the next thing, right? And that's a communication style. Now, what you're talking about when you say speaking more directly, is this about adapting to an existing model? Or should there be a little bit of give and take from both sides?
I think it's got to be give and take from everyone.
Yeah.
For example, you know, we are talking about, it could be worth it, just rate it, open a can here, that be more as macro. Yeah. And we're looking at the different skills kids are going to need going forward. Yeah. And it's been talked about loads, you know, resilience and this, that. They're not going to need to necessarily know about Pythagoras theory, because they can school that. At the end of the day, they don't have to memorize it. They don't have to necessarily memorize I, and how that's going to work out. But what they do need to know is how to communicate. What they do need to know is how to be resilient. And I think, so if we start to actually talk about autism and start to learn what is communication, how do we communicate so that people understand us well from a very young age.
So you're saying regardless, but from both sides we learn.
I mean, the other thing, there's lots of the management gurus out there basically saying we're not taught how to listen. And of course, that's key to communication as well. And again, the research might suggest that women are more capable of listening than males, because if there's a gap in the conversation, the male will jump in, whereas the female's more likely to allow space for thoughts. Again, this is the research. By the way, on the research, most of it was conducted pre-COVID, which is why we said we need to do more work to work out what's happening today. And if you go to the QR code, you can get the full report. It's about 50 pages, is it? 150 or so references. So you can just download that for free. Please contact us, and if you want to be involved in this, because we want to do more interviews and so on, please get in touch. We want to hear different viewpoints.
We've got some other questions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling to see, but I can see a question, lady in the orangey top. Yes?
So you've just touched on this, actually. You've said that you're still interviewing. What are the participation criteria? Obviously, best thing for a person.
But to be honest, we saw the interviews. The initial set we did about a dozen, I think.
Yeah.
And that's just because do you know what? When we started this, I'm going to be honest now, I'm a middle-aged white man. And when we started this conversation, I was like, I don't believe it, I need evidence. So it was me who actually conducted the literature review, and then like 150 papers later and 50 pages, like, oh right, we've got a real problem here. Let's try and fix it. I just hadn't seen it because I'm living my own little bubble. So we did some qualitative work just to verify some of the findings in the literature review, just to make sure and that's why Paige was saying, actually it's kind of changed, it's still there, but maybe those 70s male chauvinistic views have kind of gone a little bit more. Thank God. So, but going forward, in terms of the criteria for the interviews, we just want to hear from a broad spectrum, male and female, public sector, corporate, young, old, different personality types. So, you know what, if we put a criteria on it, we'd probably get no one.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we would like to look at the finance industry. So
yeah. So
Yeah.
just do
But anybody,
email one of us,
email us.
and we'll definitely have a listen. Muriel.
Question about the physical now, because the physicality of the space is
Yeah.
high influence in the ability of transmitting information. So, and it touch not only on the size of the hole, it's also where the acoustic damping is happening and where the friction is happening. Are you researching this?
Oh, yes. So I probably should have given a little bit of my background. So I work for Ecophon, and I work for a department within our company that we actually research. We conduct research, we do research on the subject of room acoustics. Now, what's interesting, we've done so much in the world of psychoacoustics, but this specific topic, we've touched on a little bit because we knew about high frequency and lower frequencies sounds and how they travel, but not in this context. So you're definitely right, absolutely. Yeah.
And in terms of the four barriers that was highlighted by the literature review and that Page flagged up, the first one, the kind of women aren't physically heard, is obviously because of the frequency of the voice, also because males tend to lose high frequency hearing earlier onset. But that definitely has a kind of, the room layout, the acoustics will definitely impact on that. But as you kind of get further up that kind of steps, when you get to the one where the women are physically heard, they're not talked over, but they're just not acknowledged, they're just not listened to. That's kind of social. So I don't think no matter how good the room acoustics are, it's not going to fix that. So, but that's why this is interesting research. It's multi-layer. We're kind of out of time, but oh God. Sarah, quick question then.
Question. We said we're going to do a little bit more research. One area that's come up today is the whole hybrid thing and meetings, which are in person and online. I'm really interested to hear any insights into what happens when women are on Zoom calls. It's all being there, or rather,
Yes.
not be. So, yeah, that is a thing, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, that was one of the big subjects that came up, is how has this changed since we've gone online? I guess, we'll have to dip into that a bit.
To be honest, that came up in the interviews, and it's almost like a totally separate research topic. It's related, but that in itself is worthy of it. And we found, like we heard from our interviews, that they like the fact that online meetings are a bit more leveling because you can see everyone. So that hierarchy, the classic one, Mule, is you have the big rectangular boardroom, massive rectangular table, 20 people around it. You've got the middle-aged old guy CEO at one end, and then maybe some lady who's trying to break through in her career at the other end, and he just can't hear her. The room acoustics and the layout just doesn't lend it. But what we were hearing from the interviews is actually when it's a kind of Teams meeting, one of the advantages is, you can see everyone. You haven't got to look down the end of the table, and people have raised their hands and all of that. So, but yeah, it's a subject I want to look at. Anyone who's got any money out there, let us know. Sorry. Tiny question then.
Duration of differences.
with the younger one's experience, that's how has it changed? Because I don't see my 9-year-old beat.
So this, no, we didn't, to answer your question, but also too, this is where we recognized as diving into the subject, all of a sudden there were 1,000 different avenues and different things we could look at, and that's one of them. But I suspect, because one of the things we did say, we do think things are changing. Yeah. They're definitely changing, and I think there's.
And again, what came out of a little bit out of the literature review, but more out of the interviews, certainly personality traits like being more ambitious, being more assertive, or being more confident, certainly helps resolve this problem, and it affects both males and females actually. And maybe that's where some of the younger generation, we haven't done the research yet, but maybe that's where they win a little bit better because they're not going to be talked over like you said. Right, shall we give Paige a big round of applause for her presentation?